This is a story about a book. It is about Ulysses, written by James Joyce. Now, this is both a text and an author that I love. But this is a story less about him and more about her, Sylvia Beach, the woman who published this book. Before I tell you more about her, I need to find out more myself. Luckily for me, she has a connection to the place I live. Sylvia Beach was born in 1887 in Baltimore, Maryland, to Reverend Sylvester Woodbridge Beach and Eleanor Thomasine Orbison. In her youth, her family moved in accordance with her father's appointments in different churches. This included a few years in Paris, which would spark a lifelong interest in Europe for Sylvia. The family finally landed in my town of Princeton, New Jersey, in 1905. Where Beach's father had been appointed the pastor at Princeton's First Presbyterian Church, which still exists to this day. Her family lived in the church parsonage on a significantly named street, Library Place. Of her time there, Beach would reflect, "Did the name influence my choice of career in the book business? Princeton, with its trees and birds, is more a leafy, flowery park than a town, and the Beach family considered itself lucky." Sylvia ended up moving back to Paris in 1916. Drawn by her interest in French literature. There she met Adrien Monnier, the owner of one of the first lending libraries in France, who would eventually become Beach's lifelong lover and companion. With her support, Sylvia opened Shakespeare and Company, the first English-language bookshop and lending library in Paris, in 1919. Shakespeare and Company quickly became a hub for the expatriate literary society of post-war Paris. The Irish writer James Joyce arrived in Paris in 1920 and soon made Beach's acquaintance. At the time, Joyce was completing his masterpiece Ulysses, which had been published serially in a magazine in New York, where it was the subject of an obscenity trial. At a low moment, he confided in Sylvia that he didn't think his book would ever get published. Beach had never published anything before, and Joyce's work was not even finished yet. Despite the considerable financial and legal risks involved, she courageously offered to publish Ulysses herself, an offer that Joyce immediately accepted. On February 2, 1922, James Joyce's 40th birthday, the first two copies of Ulysses were printed. Beach handed the first to Joyce and displayed the second in her shop window. The day after, a crowd formed outside Shakespeare and Company just to get a look. The popularity and scarcity of the book, not to mention its groundbreaking and occasionally scandalous contents, immediately made it legendary. While she lived out the rest of her life in Paris, Sylvia would look back on New Jersey as her home, writing, "That's my state. And though there are dreary spaces and it's far too flat, I can't help being quite fond of it. The countryside, of course." Upon her death on October 5, 1962, Sylvia Beach was cremated, and her ashes were sent home for their final rest right here in Princeton. Reflecting on her death, alone in her apartment, the poet Archibald MacLeish punned on the name of her famous bookshop and the literary society that grew up around it. She is not alone, then or ever. She had the company around her. As I stood by Beach's grave on that snowy day, I thought of a quote from the book she published 100 years ago. "Every life is many days, day after day. We walk through ourselves, meeting robbers, ghosts, giants, old men, young men, wives, widows, brothers in love, but always meeting ourselves.